Well, hello everybody. My name is Jason DeCosta. Thank you for joining me today on my driving show called Driving Consistent Preterism. I have a severe Robert Statzer today. I woke up with a real pain in the neck. I don't know why. I think I slept wrong and got a little bit of a crick in the neck. You know, that little feeling that you just can't crack out of it. But we'll get through it. Pop a couple Advil and get cranking. Anyways, today's just a quick little audio that I wanted to share. Not really anything too particular, but I wanted to at least call your attention to the fact that something went down last week. I got the random urge, and I think it was Wednesday, to go over to Don K. Preston's Morning Musings. And I had saw that it was actually Daniel Rogers that was doing some teachings in place of Don Preston. And I did see that Don K. Preston seemed to still be active in the comments, so I figured, okay, this is probably a good time to get their take on a few things. So I commented on Wednesday's Morning Musing. And I brought some problems to Daniel's attention, and I said that maybe Don can help you answer this. And some of the basic problems that I presented were the Colossians dilemma, where the Colossians were under the handwritten laws, and they were guilty of being uncircumcised in the flesh. They were trespassing because of that uncircumcision. And I asked how. How could a foreigner be trespassing because of being uncircumcised? Doesn't make sense. What handwritten laws were against them? I also brought up some other things, like the gospel going to all nations before the end, as Jesus said, and Paul saying the fullness of the ones in the nations coming in before the end as well. So I brought these things to Daniel's attention, and to no surprise, he responded in the same way that I thought he was going to, like they always do. These guys are sort of trained to dodge and weave and dip and get out of headlocks, but they realized they probably couldn't this time. So Daniel presented an answer that was really laughable, and immediately reverted back to the Amorites, which they usually do. Whenever they get stuck, they always say, well, God judged other nations. You know, that's their go-to. And that's all besides the point. None of that matters. The main point here, and I've explained that many times for those of you who have followed me, you know what the reason God judged wicked nations for and moved wicked nations for and destroyed Israel's enemies and so on and so forth. It was all because of Israel, the apple of his eye. It stems from the promise given to Abraham that he would bless those who bless them and curse those who curse them. So it was all about Israel and protection, and it always related to them and to his people in some way. It was many different things, but it always had something to do with them. So, and by the way, just because God calls them wicked and vile and even sometimes sinners, yes, he does, that doesn't include them in Israel's salvation story. That is a big problem that people seem to get caught up in. Just because God calls a nation wicked, vile, or even sinners does not mean that that nation is transgressing God's law that was exclusively given to Israel, which was called the curse. That's the curse in this story, folks. It was either going to be a blessing to them or a curse to them. And as Paul defines for us in Galatians, the law was the curse, and as many as were under that law were under the curse. It was a very exclusive curse. Paul shows that exclusivity here. He says, as many as are under the works of the law are under the curse. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law. So you can see that the curse only had to do with those who had the law. It couldn't pertain to people outside of it. That would be illogical and forced. But just because God calls these nations wicked and vile and sinners doesn't mean that they're included in this salvation story. I think people automatically equate the two as being related, but that's false to the core. I mean, just look at what Paul said, for example. He said, sin was in the world before the law, but not imputed where there is no law. So you can see that sin has always been there. Sin is always sort of mentioned as being in the story. The issue is that when the law came, it gave sin its strength. It gave sin its killing power, and it gave sin the ability to bring the death. All right? Like Paul calls it, the law of sin and death. So without that law to impute that sin remained in sort of a dormant, powerless state. But when the law came, sin lived and they died. All right, so sin was never the problem here on its own. Sin coupled with the law that was given exclusively to the people of Israel seems to be the main issue. So when you have these mentionings of other nations being sinful, it doesn't equal them being in violation of God's laws. It doesn't. It's totally separate from the main narrative that's going right through the center of this story, and that's Israel and their transgressions of God's law and their mishandling and not cherishing the law that they had been entrusted with. Excuse me. So that's just one thing that these guys always revert to that is real stupid, because they don't understand the promise that he would bless and curse those who interacted with those who would become as the stars of heaven in multitude, Abraham's descendants, aka Israel. But so I ended up hitting him back and explaining to him why he's wrong. And then he mentioned the healing of the nations. And I told him that the healing of the nations cannot extend beyond the coming of the Lord, because Jesus said that all the nations would receive the gospel by the coming. All right, he equates the gospel with the healing of the nations, but Jesus said that the gospel would go to all nations and then the end would come. Paul said that all nations would get the gospel, and in that way all the Gentiles, those out in the nations, would have come in by the coming. So you can't push the healing of the nations out if that's related to the gospel, because the gospel was going to all nations before the end came. It doesn't work. It's illogical. Okay, but that doesn't seem to matter to these guys. They just play dumb and keep trudging. But so I showed him that, and then he just sort of raptured. He vanished away, evaporated into thin air. Then the next day he put out another one, and so I came back again and I questioned him on Romans 9. And I explained a few things to him, how Paul asks about the mercy that God was having on the Gentiles, simply meaning those out in the nations. And then Paul quotes 3 passages that are all about Israelites in the nations. He quotes Hosea and 2 from Isaiah, all of which specifically and very clearly say that these Gentiles, this is what Paul is saying. He's like, hey guys, look, you Gentiles whom God is having mercy on here, this is where this all comes from. Hosea 1, though the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, and scattered in all nations where I have driven them, the remnant will be saved. This is what's going on here, guys, says Paul. And then he quotes Isaiah. He says, Isaiah also cries out concerning Israel, though the number of them be as the sand of the sea, the remnant will be saved. Then he quotes Isaiah again, saying, if God hadn't left us a remnant, blah, 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 we would have become like Sodom and Gomorrah. But you can see the point. Paul is defining who the Gentiles are, the converted elect Gentiles, the converted Israelites in the nations. He's defining them for them and quoting passages that are all about scattered Israelites coming back. God is having mercy on them. And I told Daniel that this all stems from the promise that Moses made, that in the latter days, God would drive out in the latter days, God would call back these Israelites from the nations. They would turn to the Lord. He would have mercy on them and remember the covenant that he made with their fathers. This is all in relation to that. Moses outlined that from the start. You got to have the ability to see the full big picture here. So I brought that to his attention. Got absolutely no response. Crickets. Was waiting. Made a little comment. Okay, well, I guess you guys are ignoring my questions. A couple people prodded them, saying, hey, aren't you guys going to answer? And then suddenly Big William Bell shows up, and he comes on with a cringeworthy reply that was so confusing that I think even the wannabes were probably confused, right? And that's what these guys usually do. If you're wondering why I'm so hard on guys like Big Billy Bell and Preston, it's because of the interaction tactics that these men use. William Bell and Don Preston, more William Bell because I've interacted with him a lot more on it, they use tactics where they try to flood the argument. They know that they have no way to get around the argument. So what do? They flood the argument. They bring up irrelevant stuff. They totally babble on. They try to confuse people into thinking that they have an argument, but they're not addressing the ironclad chokehold points that do not allow them to even get a foot out of bed. William Bell used an argument that said, well, you say that Matthew 24:14 says, hold on, I got to do it in his voice. Well, you say that Matthew 24:14 says that the gospel goes to all nations. But that defeats your point, because clearly this cannot be Israel only if the gospel was going to all nations. That's a little early. I don't really have my good impression voice on right now, so I'm sorry. That probably wasn't the best, but it was close. But anyway, so his point is that because the text says the gospel was going to go to all nations, it cannot be Israel only. Do you see the problem with that statement? He is ignoring and neglecting the reason why the gospel had to go to all nations. And what was that reason? That reason was to gather the elect. The same elect that John in Revelation 7 says was the 144,000 of all the tribes of Israel. All right, so Bell, those are the types of arguments that he presents, and he expects people to just accept them and just sit down and move along and, keep listening to his podcast. But the issue here is that that's not a good answer. And finally, people are starting to see it. They have no answers. All right, so I came back and I said to Bell, I said, I forgot what I said. I don't know. I probably responded to him a couple times, and then he came back one more time with a very short and very weak answer. And I came back and I said, I'm busy tonight, but tomorrow morning, you bet, I'll be back, and I'll present you with the reasons why you're wrong. So I came back on, and I think it was Friday morning, and I presented him with probably a 7 or 8 comment reply, because YouTube cuts your comments after a certain length. And I basically addressed all of his points. I showed him why he's completely wrong. I showed him why nobody else had the law. I showed him why he's not Abraham's seed, because he's redefining that term in a way that the Bible never uses it. I showed him why the borders won't even allow him 1 foot out of bed, because all Israel was saved, including all the elect Gentiles. And I showed him a host of other problems with his view, as well as many New Testament passages that conclusively prove that these letters were written to scattered Israelites. And that was on Friday morning. So here we are 3 days later, as of this recording, and there's been nothing. No response. The only thing that we've gotten is a couple bonehead people who are not realizing the strength of the arguments and still quoting passages from Galatians and Ephesians. Like, they just don't get it. And this is the problem, and look, I'm not the smartest person in the world, all right? There's things that I specialize in, and there's areas of study, such as the Bible, where I feel like I've been gifted a bit more than others. But I'm not the smartest person in the world. I'm not going to go into, history and claim that I know everything about history or, whatever the case may be. Some people are way more smart in those areas than I am. But these people, this is the problem with Bible people, right? Bible people pick up a Bible, they read John 3:16, and they become teachers, right? They read that one passage and they're like, all right, I'm doing it. I'm going to teach. Look, the Bible says this. But really, you need a brain, first of all, and you need diligence, you need honesty, you need to be repetitive in your studies. You have to continually approach the text in an unbiased way and try to learn the culture and the history and why things were said. And most importantly, you have to allow the Bible to interpret the Bible. You can't take a term such as Abraham's seed or Abraham's descendants, to whom we're going to become the stars of the heavens in multitude, and then change that term to mean what you want it to mean. You can't do that. That term in the Bible is always used to refer to Israelites. They were the ones who were going to become as the stars of heaven in multitude. You cannot change that to now mean all people spiritually descended by faith. It never meant that in the story. So you can't do that. You can't take the term sheep, excuse me, and see that it's always about Israelites in the Old Testament, and then come to the New Testament and see that the gospel's going out to gather the lost sheep of Israel, and then suddenly that becomes you. Excuse me. So you have to let the Bible interpret the Bible. And unfortunately, we have every bozo and his brother out there teaching the Bible, and we got a couple of them from the peanut gallery in those comments that were trying to argue against it. And again, back to my original point, people say, a couple people have asked me over the last few months, why are you so hard on Brother Bell? And it's like they feel bad for the guy. And you know what? I felt bad for him too after the butt whooping I placed on him in our exchange a few months back. However, the reason why I'm so hard on Brother Bell is because Brother Bell treated me in that exchange as if I was a nobody. It was like I was some little, I think he called me a little horn with a big voice or something. I don't know. He made a few jabs at me that made it seem like he viewed me as a nobody. You know, this kid doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a joke. He's a laughingstock. But those of you who have followed our exchanges along know that this is the ultimate David and Goliath story times 10, right? Bell took a rock to the forehead and he still hasn't got up. His bell was rung. All right, so Bell has yet to reply. I can't see him even replying. If he does, it's going to be a joke because he's got nowhere to go. What's he going to do? Redefine the term Abraham's seed and try to put all people under the law? I've showed him clearly that he's got nowhere to go. So it's best for him to just stay quiet and not say anything, and that's what I think he's going to do. If he's dumb enough to come at it again, then I will have much more for him. Trust me. I only gave him the tip of the iceberg. But I just don't appreciate the way that he treated me in our exchange in terms of considering me a nobody who doesn't know what he's talking about. So I take extra special pleasure in rubbing his face in the dirt. And yeah, so the point of this audio, if you haven't read our exchange, please go do so, because you don't know when it's going to be taken down. It could be taken down at any point. Who knows? I'm surprised they allowed it to remain up as long as they have. I think they know that enough eyes have been on it and enough people have interacted with it that if they take it down now, it's real fishy, right? It doesn't look good. So it's been up there. Yeah, go take a look at it. Okay, it's the good one is the morning musings from last Thursday, where Daniel Rogers, I can't remember what number his teaching was, but it's the one from last Thursday. All right, and you'll see my comment and then about 150 comments under that comment. Take some time to read through those comments. Notice the lack of replies from the bigwigs. Notice the peons in the little, peanut gallery arguing an argument that they don't even understand. All right, this guy's still arguing with me that he's Abraham's seed through faith when I just showed him that Abraham's seed meant nothing other than Israelites. But this is what you get. This is what I'm saying. You get unintelligent people who cannot handle the big picture and don't have the brain capacity to see it all and put it all together. And so they just argue. And you end up getting frustrated. And that's a lot of times what happens with me. But go check it out. Take a read through it. And then if you get done with that and you want to read more, go to the day before. I think it was Wednesday's morning musings, and read the comments there where I challenged them again. Or I should say the first time. And they presented nothing that was of any value. But yeah, that's about all I wanted to share today. I plan on recording a few audios this week. I think I should have some time in my office. And the ones that I hope to do, I want to do another one on Abraham's seed and sort of tie it together with the things that we read in the New Testament. Like Paul said in Romans 4, he kind of takes that promise where, and it was said that Abraham would become the father of many nations. So I wanted to take a look at that and compare it to everything that we read about Abraham's seed in the Old Testament. So I hope to do one on that. I also want to do one on Acts 17, where God commands all men everywhere to repent, because I think that one's brutally botched. And people are always using that one, not realizing that the story came to an end and that repentance was tied to the final judgment that was at hand. So I'm going to be doing one on that, hopefully this week. And maybe one on the good shepherd versus the bad shepherd, stuff like that. So hopefully got a few audios for you coming down the pike. But yeah, man, get out there. hold these guys to the fire in the Facebook groups and in your discussions. Use the material that I presented to William Bell in that 7 or 8 YouTube reply. What I'm going to try to do today is get all that on a Microsoft Word document. And if I can successfully do that, I will post it in the comments of this audio. That way you guys can save it and have it for your records, because I think it's a nice summary of the Bible, and I've gotten a lot of feedback on it. Like, people were really excited about it. One guy said it was one of the best refutations he's ever read, and most complete. And so, and I've actually got 3 emails since, 2 from new people that I don't know, commending me and complimenting me on that, and saying that it makes tons of sense to them. So a lot of good feedback on that, and I hope to get it in a Word document. But I'm a freaking caveman, man. I don't know what I'm doing with these tech savvy kind of things. I really don't even know how to do a Microsoft Word. Well, I shouldn't say that. I know how to do it, but saving it and getting it uploaded and all that stuff really troubles me. So that's what I'm saying. We're good. We're all good in different things. I suck when it comes to this computer stuff. People are really good at it, you know. But you can't read John 3:16 and then go out and teach and think you're a theologian like Stephen Dipset Whitset. All right, you got to put in the time. You got to be unbiased and honest mostly, which these guys clearly are not. So anyways, thank you all for listening on my ride into work. I did not crash. That's a good thing. And I will be back soon, hopefully, with an audio for your enjoyment. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.